I'm Roeloff van Zyl, and I'm one of the UX designers at Structured. The methodology is human-centered or user-centric design, keeping your user and your customers in the forefront. So UX is all about the user, their needs and their pain points, and then making sure that it's inclusive for everyone and giving them a good user experience. The importance of UX design in any business or project or platform or tool you're building is being human-centered, user-centric, keeping them in the forefront. Whether it's an internal service or external tool for consumer use, it's definitely, you can't build a product if it's not based on the user and their needs. Basically, who's your user, where do they come from? Because every person comes from somewhere else, everybody has a different language, different culture, so that we all have different perspectives. So it's very important to know who they are, to understand them and where you can meet them at. So how that all translates into a good user experience is principles like internationalization and localization. So internationalization is the process of making your product or service work for multiple locations, and that determines the scalability of your product. Then translating that into localization is allowing your platform or service to adapt to your different locations where your personas or user base is located. So some examples of localization is allowing the functionality of bidirectionality, and that's allowing users who read right to left and not left to right to flip their user interface and then give them that affordance on how they read from right to left. So another example is translation. So we can't always rely on apps like Google Translate, for example. Sometimes you need a professional in because certain words have different meanings in the context it's being used. So the third one would be date formats. Certain countries place the month first and others the date first. Certain countries have more than 3 characters for months and others have 2. Comma separate values. Is it representing thousands? Is it representing decimals? And that's another consideration you need to have. And then the fourth one would be color psychology, and that's not a new phenomenon. It's been in branding for a while, and it made its way into user experience design with this whole concept of internationalization, localization. And one thing to remember is certain cultures perceive white, for example, as cleanliness and purity. They marry in white, but then other cultures might have negative connotations to white, and that would be death, and they would wear white to funerals. So another consideration that you need to take into account for a very intuitive and inclusive user experience of your product, whether it's an internal or consumer-based tool, is the concept of accessibility. Accessibility is quite a new phenomenal methodology to include in your product strategy, and that's to make sure people with visual impairedness, hearing impairedness, to take them in account in your design process and making your product accessible to them. So some quick examples of accessibility is not only internationalization, localization, that falls in accessibility. Some other examples might be your font size. Is it too small or too big? Is your font color too light? Because that obviously for color blindness is very important to consider. So those are some other examples of allowing localization in your product. So use cases where we have been approached before was whether it's an internal tool or a consumer-based tool, was to obviously apply the principles of internationalization, localization, to scale the product in order to allow the user to localize into their language. Some requirements were multiple language translations, like it would be 5 to 6 languages, including modern and traditional Mandarin, Korean, Japanese, Russian, German, the list goes on. Obviously from a design perspective and build perspective, there's a lot of considerations we need to make sure that we are covering for those languages. We needed to make sure that the currency, symbols and those affordances, whether it's placed in the beginning of the amount or on the back of the amount, that needed to be considered. And also, like I mentioned, the comma separated values, whether it's thousands or decimals, spaces. So one of the things we always do is to bring those discussions of internationalization, localization from the beginning of our discussions with you, so that we make sure that those requirements and those users' needs are met.